Welcome, everyone. My name is Frances Birch with BBRSDA. Thank you so much for tuning in to hear about the 2024 Bristol Bay salmon forecast from Alaska Department of Fish and Game from the biologist team, and an update on the test fisheries from Jordan Head, the Executive Director of the Bristol Bay Science and Research Institute, BBSRI. All right, with that, I would like to introduce Stacy Vega, Bristol Bay Area Research Biologist, who will get us started with an introduction to the 2024 forecast. Thanks, Stacy. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having us. I need to share the screen. Guess I had moved it over. Sorry about that. All right. Hello. Hi. I'm Stacy Vega. I am the Bristol Bay Area Research Biologist for Commercial Fisheries out in Bristol Bay. And I'm going to kick this talk off with our 2024 forecast. Just kind of get right into it, and you can ask questions at the end, and it'll be pretty quick. So get going. Okay, so this year's total run forecast for Bristol Bay is 39 million sockeye with a 80% confidence range of 25 to 53 million fish. This figure shows our forecasts and observed total runs back through 2001. So the blue bars are the actual runs that we observed, and the red dots are the preseason forecast for that year. You'll notice that this year we do have a noticeably lower forecast than in recent past, the lowest that we've had in a decade. Our forecast is split into 36 individual predictions. They are predictions for each individual age class of each of the 9 major rivers that flow into Bristol Bay. You can kind of go across the page and see each river's forecasted age class, and then the total for each of those 9 rivers. In the total column, those totals have district totals as well, or that column has district totals. But what I'm sure what most people are interested is the available surplus in 2024. So there's 2 things that kind of give us that number. The first is our target escapement levels, which vary by river. And the second is to account for harvest outside of Bristol Bay, mainly on the South Peninsula June fishery. So once we account for those 2 things, we expect our total run. Sorry, getting a call. After those, accounting for those 2 things, we're looking at about a 25 million harvestable surplus in 2024. Okay, so this plot here is a representation of our forecast performance and the errors that we've seen in the last 23 years. So the red bars are years where we forecasted more fish than actually came back. Oh, sorry, less fish than actually came back. And the blue bars are when we forecasted more than actually. Sorry, reverse that. Red years are less. We forecasted more than what we observed. Blue bars are when we forecasted less than what we observed. And you can see this recent productivity regime we've been in since about 2015. We have had some, our forecasts have been lower than what we've actually seen. That just kind of is how it goes with really large runs. It's hard to predict those. Average over the last decade is about 20%. We've averaged forecast 20% below what we've seen come back. And over the whole time period here, back to 2000, we're about 15% off from what we have seen in actual return total runs. Just a quick summary, we're expecting 39 million fish bay-wide, between 25 and 53 million total. Our biggest, and that leaves a potential harvestable surplus of 25 million fish inshore. The biggest uncertainty we have in this year's forecast, I just kind of want to make note, are basically the 1-3 age class bay-wide. As I'm sure a lot of you are kind of aware, last year the 1-2 age class didn't return like we thought it would. It actually was about half of what we were expecting to see. So that small return of 1-2s last year is going to kind of equate to a smaller return of 1.3s this year. A little bit about that 2019 brood year, which is the parent year for the fish that we would expect to see as 1.3s this year. That was that really massive heat wave in Alaska. Bristol Bay was not an exception to that. I'm sure you were there, aware of just how kind of hot it was and how hot it got and the effect that that can have on fish. We know just by seeing, dead fish in the rivers that there was some level of mortality before spawning adults could even make it to the grounds. There's also potential for effects on eggs that were actually successfully laid. We just don't quite know the full effects of that yet, but we are expecting to see a little bit lower of that brood year return this year, and that's kind of the major kind of question mark, so to speak. Here's a QR code for the forecast if anyone wants the full 5-page detailed summary of that. I think that's my last one. Yeah, I can pause for questions if anyone has any specific to the forecast, or I can let Travis jump in Naknek-Kvichack management.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any hands quite yet, so let's go ahead. Next, I'd like to introduce Travis Ellison, Naknek-Kvichack area biologist for a management outlook for the Eastside Fisheries.
Yeah, hello everyone. So yeah, for looking at how management's looking early season for this coming year, we run a normal 9 a.m. Monday to 9 a.m. Friday early season schedule. That'll start Monday, June 3rd and run through Friday, June 21st. During that early season schedule, we'll have the full district open to both drift and set gill nets. Once fishing closes at 9 a.m. June 21st, we'll be watching to see, if the run's started yet. Always keeping a close eye on Egegik since that tends to be a little earlier. Looking for reports of fish coming in. We'll be watching escapements, especially. If it's slow, there's a good chance we could sit for a couple days waiting for the run to build. Once we start getting some fish showing up, kind of plan on doing 1 tide a day in Naknek section only. There early on. As that run builds, we could quickly go to 2 tides a day. But given the way the forecast is laid out, that early season stuff's probably going to be Naknek section only. We'll be watching the Kvichack real close. Kind of the trigger point there for starting to get some opportunity on the Kvichack side for drifters is where I'm looking for having 2 million fish past the district. So I'm looking at the counting tower, our estimated in-river fish, and then what I think's between our in-river test fishery and the district, and that's based on set net catches. So those are the things I'm looking at often when we're looking around 800,000 to 1.2, 1.3 million past the counting tower. We might already have that 2 million fish in the river. So that's kind of where I'll be flying daily, keeping an eye on that. And then once we get that 2 million minimum into the Kvichack, we can start having some periods over on the Kvichack side. I don't expect to have any kind of back to back kind of openers over there until maybe late season. One of the things about the Kvichack is it takes fish about 3 tides to get through it. So if we're fishing it every single tide, we can really wipe them out. Naknek's completely different story. They shoot right through the district, right through that section and into the river sometimes before we open. So we're always getting escaping there every tide. But that's the plan for the season. I could take questions now or at the end.
Thank you. Let's see, I don't see anyone yet. Reminder, if you're on the phone, *9 will pop you up here. But I don't see anyone yet, so we'll keep moving along. Next, we'll hear from Aaron Tiernan, Egegik and Ugashik area biologist. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Francis. Good afternoon, everybody. So be a little overview of the Lower East Side management early season and how we're going to move into the EO openings. Starting off at Egegik, got the early season scheduled 9 a.m. Monday to 9 a.m. Wednesday, and then a short break, and then back out at 9 a.m. Thursday to 9 a.m. Friday. That'll go from June 3rd through Friday, June 14th. Egegik's forecast, a little over 5 million, quite a bit lower than we've seen in recent years. So we're going to be a little less liberal in the early part of the season until that run starts to come in. And even then, it'll, it might only be one tide a day, but we'll see how the fish behave and how they enter. Shifting down to Ugashik, early season schedule 9 a.m. Monday, 9 a.m. Friday. That'll start June 3rd and last through the 21st of June. With the larger forecast that we have down there, I'd like to get started on fishing a little sooner if the fish do show up. So potential to be a little bit more liberal early on. We'll see how the fish behave, if they want to mill or if they decide to start to shoot through the district. But I'll be paying attention to set net harvests in the inner part of the district, also up at the village too, to give me an indication of abundances moving through and up the river, because it could be a 5 to 7 days between district and the time they're counted at the tower. So we kind of have to rely on that harvest metric and our in-river test fish to give us earlier indications. We'll be looking at to see if walrus are hauling out at Port Greg again, Cape Greg. If they do, we'll be shifting that north line to the south about a mile like we have in previous years. So yeah, it's just a little kind of insight of what I'm thinking right now for Egegik and Ugashik. I can take any questions or we can wait. Up to you all.
Thank you. We did have a question pop up. I think I moved this along, but Randy, go ahead. You should be able to speak now. Go ahead, Randy? Sorry. Yeah, I think you should be able to. So it's talking permitted, but you might still be muted on your end. All right, I have one in the written chat here. David is asking, have you ever seen? Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Randy.
Oh, sorry. My question was on the meeting we had a month or so ago with Bristol Bay Regional Seafood Development. Their forecast was 44.8 million comparison to 37.9 million. So, and the big difference was Ugashik. Alaska Department of Fish and Game, they have a 3.69 surplus, and the other meeting we had, it was 8.23. So why is there such a discrepancy for the two, Alaska Department of Fish and Game and wherever forecasts the Regional Seafood Development came up with?
Yeah, so that forecast, that higher number for Ugashik you're talking about is from the forecast that FRI puts out. I do want to note that the data that goes into both of our forecasts is the same. The input is the same. We use the same data, but the selection of the models that we choose for our final forecasts do differ and can differ. The difference in Ugashik is it's a large part in a number of the number of 1-2s that they predict to be returning to the system. We I can't speak directly to their forecast and their model selection, but we did see the largest number of jacks returned to Ugashik ever last year, and that heavily influences the number of 1-2s that we see in some of our models for forecasting. They chose a model that had a higher return of 1-2s coming back to Ugashik. We chose different models and hybridized models that gave us a lower number based on historical trends, what we, just what we think the system can support, and our number is lower. So yeah, the major difference between our forecasts, a large part of it is that Ugashik 1-2 number. We're still forecasting a very large number of 1-2s. 3 million is by no means small. But yeah, theirs is just higher based on their model select.
Well, with the biologist, is he monitoring that, the 1-2s, if he sees a large amount of fish in the 1-2 category, that he may give a little more fishing time down there, especially earlier on, based on that information?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. We do get age structure, what the age structure of the harvest is in season. We get that periodically as the samples come in, but mostly I'm looking at harvests and total harvests when we do have periods, and comparing those to what the average harvest on that day through time was. And so if we're starting to see total harvests that are well above long-term average for that day, that typically kind of gives me confidence that we're dealing with a larger abundance of fish, maybe. So we'll be a little bit more liberal. Also, we do need to pay attention to what's going upriver at the same time too. But I'm not looking so much to the age as just what the overall harvest is at any given point in time.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Randy. Good question. I think we have some similar questions in the Q&A here. One asks, have you ever seen 1-2 fish not show 1 year and show up as 1-3s?
Well, I guess I'll say that the 1-2s didn't not show up. They just showed up in less proportion than we thought they would. So there's still 1-2s that did returns. We do expect to see fish that are 1-3 aged, same brood year as that. Have we ever seen an age class not come up and then come up in subsequent years? That certainly is possible. I can't speak specifically to Ugashik, but certainly fish can wait an extra year if they, if they so choose and the environment supports it. That is possible, but I can't really right now pinpoint an exact example of that. But certainly we're not expecting for the whole age class to be completely gone. It'll just be less than what we predicted it to be and what we forecasted it to be.
Thank you. And then another question, which you might have already answered, Aaron, but how are you feeling about the amount of 1-2s for Ugashik?
Yeah, good question. Definitely based on what we saw last year, like Stacy mentioned, we had an extremely large percentage of jacks come back. So I feel pretty confident that the 1-2s will come in. As to how much, time's going to tell on that one. But yeah, all signs are pointing to good right now. So we'll wait and see how things develop in season.
Okay, and I guess a follow-up there. Do Ugashik 1-2s have any kind of distinct run timing, earlier or later?
No, not that we can tease out with our data really. With how compressed the season is to begin with, most of these fish just are kind of coming in, just waves. And it might, if there's any separation, it's going to be at where they're headed within the drainage versus what their age is.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we've covered everyone that typed in here, and I'm not seeing any other hands. Next, we'll move on to Tim Sands, Nushagak Togiak biologist, for the management outlook on the Westside fisheries. Go ahead, Tim.
Thank you, Francis. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, I'll take a shot at David's question there about the 1-2s, 1-3s. I think, the 1-2s are a very good predictor for 1-3s in the Nushagak, for example. Mostly because we feel like the Nushagak is primarily a 1-3 system, but the 1-2s the Wood River is more of a 1-2 system, so we wouldn't necessarily see as strong a relationship between 1-2s in the wood as 1-3s in the wood. So it all depends on the system. I don't know if that helps at all, but it system by system. In 2023, I think we had half the 1.2s come back that we forecast, which was 3.5 million. We had 3.5 million come back and forecasted 7 million. So it's still a really strong number of 1.2s for the Nushagak district. It'll remains to be seen how they'll show up as 1.3s. Okay, so for 2024 Nushagak management, the big thing is the triggers. I'm sure everybody's aware that the Board of Fish adopted the King Salmon Stock of Concern Action Plan last March. In that plan, they created these triggers. There's triggers to start fishing. They're based on a percentage of the forecast. So for 2024, the 6% of the Nushagak forecast for sockeye salmon is 210,000. So when we project 210,000 sockeye salmon past the sonar counters, that would satisfy the trigger, and that would allow us to start fishing in the district. If we don't hit that trigger, 10% of the Wood River forecast, so 780,000 sockeye salmon past the Wood River Tower, would be the next trigger. And if neither of those triggers are satisfied, then June 28th at 9 a.m. would be the last trigger that would allow us to start fishing. In 2023, we started fishing in the evening of June 25th. My best guess is it'll be sometime around that time again in 2024. Last year I said 26th. 26 seems reasonable, plus or minus whatever, but we do not have to wait to June 28th. And I think there are a few people that were confused by that last year. So any one of those triggers can let us start fishing. The other thing the board did was it created optimum escapement goals, OEGs, that supersede our sustainable escapement goals, our SEGs, for the Wood and Nushagak River for sockeye salmon. And basically what they said was they'd add 15% of the forecast to the top end of the escapement goal. Wood River goal is 700,000 to 1.8 million. Add 15%, and that takes us basically to 3 million. So my goal as manager is going to try and keep the Wood River escapement under that 3 million mark. For the Nushagak River for sockeye salmon, the top end of the OEG would be 1.43 million. Next. Stacy. Thank you. So again, my best guess for when we satisfy one of those triggers is June 26. In 2023, the difference between the old regulations of projecting 100,000 sockeye past Wood River Tower and the ones the board put in meant that we, instead of fishing on the 22nd, we waited till evening of the 25th. And my estimation is we had over 10,000 king salmon escape in that window. So it did make a significant difference in king salmon conservation. Once we start fishing for the drift fleet, I expect to try and keep total fishing to under 12 hours a day through the end of June. So 4 to 6 hour drift openings. If there's an opportunity, if it looks like things have slowed, there's not a lot of fish moving in, we might try and take a whole tide off. If it's gonna be windy and there's lots of fish around, we might fish the whole day. We're gonna be responsive to what the fish are indicating and trying to meet all the different goals we're trying to meet. Set net openings will be closed around low tide. We are going to try and have some periods every day of all gear out of the water because of the restrictions about when we can open and close set netting. That's going to mean most of the closures are going to be around low water. For the Wood River Special Harvest area, the trigger to open that is when we have 1.1 million sockeye salmon past the Wood River Tower and project 1.4 million past the tower. Since we're front loading the escapement with these big triggers, it's likely that we will hit that 1.1 million escapement relatively early in the season. I think it was the 27th last year. Once we hit that 1.1 million, the gear type that is behind in their harvest percentage gets to fish in the Wood River Special Harvest Area. Last year, that was the drift gillnet fleet got to start. They were behind. They caught up within a day, and then it switched over to set gillnet, and then set gillnet stayed in there for the rest of the season. So I don't know how it'll play out this year, but that's the rules behind it. Next. One thing that's I've been asked about by a couple people, and so I'm kind of telling everybody or presenting this in every presentation. Last year, BBSRI ran the Naknek-Kvichack Tower. And so Naknek-Kvichack is a tributary of the Nushagak, and their tower count was 2.3 million sockeye salmon, and our sonar count, our index, both of these are indexes, because we're not counting every fish in either case. Our index for sockeye salmon at the sonar was 1.77 million. So historically, we would have expected our sonar counts to be higher than the tower count. The tower count historically is about 74% of the sonar, and that's based on probably 15 years of data that we had when we operated both the Naknek-Kvichack Tower and the sonar at the same time. We're trying to figure out why this is, what's going on. One thing we know is when you're counting from the tower, you're looking down. So it's a little bit easier to see fish because they're not, the sonar looks from the side, and if there's a bunch of fish swimming right by where the transducer beam comes in, there can be masking. So the potential for masking is much higher with a side-looking sonar than looking down from the tower. Both situations, we're only counting the edges of the river. We're not counting all the way across the river. So there could be fish that were more in the middle at the sonar site and more along the bank at the tower site. Like I said, we're continuing to study the issue. Next. So again, the escapement goals and management decisions are all based on the sonar numbers. That's in regulation. So what we get from the sonar is what we're making management decisions on. The tower's much further upriver. There's much longer lag time for fish to get up there, and it's just not that great for making decisions. Sonar has a long data set that we've based all of our escapement goals on, and we have confidence in that as an index. They're both indexes, but we have confidence in the sonar data. The way both situations work is we count for 10 minutes on each side of the river and multiply that by 6. For the sonar, we have inshore and offshore strata on each side of the river, so we're actually doing 4 separate counts on each side of the river, or 4 separate counts for each hour. And then the sonar doesn't tell us the species. We have to apportion the raw counts to species with drift gill nets. So we have a whole program where we have crew going out and setting. Last year it was 96 nets every day to apportion the fish in the species. I think we're dialing that back a little this year, but we're putting a lot of work into it. So that's how the sausage is made with sonar counts. Next, and here's just an example of the sonar beam. The red lines are the insonified zone. There's a little gray bar that comes down in front of the sonar, and that's a weir that forces the fish around. So the fish have to go on the outside of that gray bar. so they can't sneak behind the sonar in the less insonified zones, but there is a little area between the blue line at the top and the red line in front of that gray bar where salmon in theory could go by. The little black squares at the bottom are the bottom of the river. But again, if there's a whole mass of fish going right in front of that gray bar, then the fish that are further out might not be able to be seen by the sonar. That's why I was talking about looking from the side. You can completely block the picture further out in the river if there's a million fish going by right at the very edge closest to the beam or the beam's origin. I think that's it. Next. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Tim. There is one question, and it might have been covered if there's kind of different names for the towers, but this says, has the department sorted out the Portage Creek sonar count versus Upper Nushagak tower count for 2023?
Yes, that's what I just talked about.
Okay, same thing.
Yep.
A little different name. Great.
We
Thanks for
haven't sorted it
answering
out,
that.
but we're working on it. We know that there's a disparity there, but the bottom line is the sonar is the numbers that we're going by for management decisions.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks so much. I'll just take a minute here in case anyone's working through the technology. But all right. Next, I would like to introduce Jordan Head, who's the Executive Director of the Bristol Bay Science and Research Institute, BBSRI, and he'll share with us the 2024 test fishery overview and plan for the Port Moller and Nushagak test fishery. Thank you, Jordan. Go ahead.
Hello. Give me 1 second. I think I have the right presentation up. Hi, thanks, Francis. Jordan Head with the Bristol Bay Science and Research Institute. Today we're just going to talk about the test fisheries that are being operated in the Bay this year. And then also I wanted to give a quick update on the Bristol Bay Fisheries Collaborative, something that gets thrown around a lot, but maybe not everybody understands exactly what that is. So first we'll dive into that. The Bristol Bay Fisheries Collaborative came about after 2016. In 2016, ADF&G's Bristol Bay area staff had faced about 30% of their overall budget being cut over the course of several years. And as a result, we're facing the loss of a lot of in-season assessment projects that are used for management, and as a result would have been facing much more conservative management without some of these escapement projects and ASL projects. Port Moller test fishery was on the block, things like that. So in 2017, BBFC was formed as to ensure that there was sufficient resources, mostly monetary resources, to intensively manage the Bristol Bay fishery. And what happened was Michael Link and Jeff Regnart and some others put together kind of a framework where industry partners, local village corporations, regional village corporations, processing industry, and fishermen in combination with the Bristol Bay Science and Research Institute to fund what we called the core program. So from 2017 to 2021, over $3 million was contributed towards those core programs within Bristol Bay. In 2021, Senator Hoffman's office put in a special legislative allotment to cover that core program. And therefore we didn't have to go and try and get that from industry and fishermen. That was a 2-year, that had a 2-year sunset clause on it. And that was set to end last June in 2023, but The good news was that core program, about $800,000 a year, was added back into ADF&G's general fund allocation. So that money is secured back into ADF&G's budget. So what that includes is it includes all the inshore ADF&G projects, and it includes about half of the funding for the Port Moller test fishery. So over the last 2 to 3 years and going into this year, BBSRI, the RSDA, you guys, and processors have been funding the second half of the Port Moller test fishery. And this year, that's going to be around $110,000 from BBRSDA, coming out to less than $100 per permit holder who's a member of RSDA. So that's kind of a recap on the Bristol Bay Fisheries Collaborative. Next, we'll move into Port Moller test fishery. In 2023, the Port Moller test fishery operated from June 11th to July 13th. And there was I just want to throw out, 4 quick benefits of that program last year. We've moved towards a 2-boat system, which I'll get into here in just a minute, but we only had 1 missed day of fishing due to weather last year, which was the second greatest coverage on the Port Moller project, only exceeded by 2022. As we heard a lot about the missing 2 ocean fish in earlier presentations, Port Moller test fish gave a really good indication that something was up last year, and straying away from the forecast. The preseason forecast was for about 55% 3 ocean fish. Those early test fisheries age compositions were all indicating that 3 ocean fish were making up over 80% of the run at that point in time. So that gave us really good early season indications that something was different. We were either missing the 2 ocean component of the run, or it was a massive 3 ocean, which it didn't seem to be. And so the kind of through June, we were indicating upwards of 80% 3 ocean fish. And that is the end of season ADF&G season summary indicated it was 80% 3 ocean fish last year. So for questions on, Port Moller is a pretty good early season indicator of what the age composition is shaking out to be for the year, and can be used to compare against the forecast. Another thing that we did last year that Scott has started doing in more recent years, he started estimating average weight of sockeye that we're seeing at Port Moller. And on June 20th and June 25th, Scott put out kind of forecasted estimates of average weight of fish in passing Port Moller, and his estimates on those days were 5.6 pounds, which turned out to be really close to the postseason reported by ADF&G of 5.5 pounds. And that's something he'll continue to do. So if you're interested, check out the daily updates. He sometimes sneaks those in there. There was 12 sets of stock composition estimates last year, and those have continued to match very well with what shows up inshore. We have a lab on one of the vessels at Port Moller who's we're doing the genotypes at sea, and that has taken the turnaround time on those from averaging around 3 days down to just over a day between when fish are caught to when those genetics results are released. If you want to read more about last year in the Port Moller test fish program, there's a very extensive report available online at bbsri.org on the Port Moller test fishery page. So going into 2024, we're looking to continue a 2-boat program. We have the research vessel Ocean Cat, who's been fishing with us for a long time, and the FV Miss Leona, who fished with us last year and is going to come back, and also continue to do genetics at sea. So I wanted to quickly talk about some of the benefits that we've been seeing going to this 2-boat program. First, we've really seen an increase in spatial coverage, which would be expected. In this table, you can see going from left to right, station 0 through 26, and then going down the page is years from 1987 to 2023. And you can see from 87 up until about 2017, Port Moller was only really fishing stations 2 to 10. Occasionally they'd go out to station 12. In 2018, though, we started doing a feasibility of, what's offshore of Port Moller. And here's what we've been seeing since then. On the bottom right is 2018. And on each one of these tables, you see station 2 to 24, and then that's the percent of catches at each station as a whole of the Port Moller test fishery. You can see in 2018, we estimated about 68% of the fish that migrated offshore of station 10. And going up in 19, about 60%, 56% in 2020. And then you have years that are a little bit different. Like 2021, it was only about 47%. And then last year in 2023, only 22% of the fish were caught in those offshore stations. So what we've learned is that upwards of half of the run can be migrating offshore of station 10. But then in some years, the majority of the fish will migrate inshore, and that can lead to really bad interpretations of the catch per unit effort information. Also, with us missing half of the run, sometimes genetics didn't match up really great with what we saw inshore, and by increasing the spatial coverage, we've improved those stock composition estimates, and they've been matching up ever since we've been doing this program, been matching really well with what actually happens inshore. The at-sea lab has produced quicker genetics turnaround times. We've gone from around 3 days on average down to 1. And then we're also not having to go to shore, which leads to our boats are able to stay on the transect, and they are there waiting for weather to settle down so they can start fishing as soon as the weather allows them to. We used to get stuck in Port Moller a lot. Port Moller is a wind tunnel, and it can be really bad weather in Port Moller, and then you go out to the transect and it's perfectly fishable, but we'd end up getting stuck there quite a bit. So by not having to go to shore, we've been able to have a lot less weather days and be able to fish more of the transect more frequently. It also just offers redundancy and protection. Having 2 vessels out there, if one goes down for a day, we're still able to fish and get data to the fishery. So in 2024, we're looking at operating. Our first day of fishing is we're shooting for June 10th, and we'll be operating through about July 10th to 15th, depending on the run. In-season deliverables of the program, you guys will receive daily updates on either the email list or through text message. I think the email list is up to over 1,200 people, and there's about 1,300 people getting text messages. Also, we will put out through those same lists the genetic stock compositions and age compositions as produced by ADF&G, and also, like I said, be on the lookout for Scott's kind of weight forecasting, weight composition updates. You can sign up for those by emailing pmtf@bbsri.org or texting PMTF to the phone number at the bottom, but I'll have that again on the last slide. The other test fishery we've been operating has been Nushagak test fisheries. Tim kind of talked about with the king conservation. The primary goal of the program is to get early season information on big fish movements so that Tim can try to time those first openers after the kings have made it through the district and before there's large over escapements of sockeye. So in 2023, we operated a 5-boat test fishery from June 19th through I think June 24th. And I just want to show you, I won't talk, I know we're all pretty ready for me to be done talking, but how fish progressed into the district last year. This map shows all the areas that were fished on June 19th. The height of each individual quadrant indicates the sockeye catch per unit effort, and the colors going from yellow to red indicate large king CPUE. So red being a lot of kings were caught, yellow being none. And you can see as we scroll through these, how fish kind of progressed into the district on a day-to-day basis. June 20th, June 21st, we see some fish making it through the district. June 22nd, still not large catches. And then June 23rd is when you had a big wall of fish kind of entering and starting to make its way through the district. But we did still see a lot of kings caught, as you can indicate by the orange and red on there. So this is the kind of information we're feeding directly to Tim on a daily basis to help inform him so he can make good decisions on exactly when he's going to pull the trigger in the Nushagak. And we will be operating that with a 5-boat test fishery in 2024. And we're working with Tim on exactly what date we'll start that right now. That being said, we do nothing on our own. Everything we do at BBSRI is directly correlated with how much participation we have from organizations like the BBRSDA. And BBRSDA has made a substantial impact on the BBFC and on Port Moller test fishery, both financially and technically, and we really appreciate the support there. We also really appreciate the collaboration and working closely with ADF&G staff. Everybody who's been on the line today works very closely with us, and we try to work together to have a really good, robust, and full management program of this fishery. And over the last 5 to 7 years, everyone together has pulled together to do some really great things in the midst of really financially tough times. So we want to recognize ADF&G's regional area staff who's on the line, and especially the Gene Conservation Lab, who works very closely with us on the Port Moller Test Fish Project. So that being said, I'm available for questions, and also here's the information for you to sign up for the Port Moller Test Fish email or text service.
Thank you so much, Jordan. And I put it in the chat too, if that's easier for people to copy paste. But thank you. That's a great service in season. I do see a couple questions here written. And again, anyone on the phone, you can star 9 or raise your hand here live if you have a live question. But I'll read a couple here. David asks, on average, what is the weight for 4.5 gear and weight of 5.25 gear?
I don't have that off the top of my head. You know, Scott, who, if you go to the Port Moller test fish page on BBSRI, Scott Rayborn, who does all the data analysis on Port Moller, he's done a lot of looking into net selectivity, and his email is there. And that would be a great question for Scott if you're looking at something like that. But that's not something I have that I can pull right here.
That's all right. Thank you. That's a good resource. Rick asks, how do area biologists use in-season Port Moller information to manage districts?
I'll take a shot at that. For me, looking at what happens at Port Moller, I use a 7-day lag time for those fish to get to the Nushagak district, and it's kind of an early warning system. It tells me if things are looking like they're going to be above or below forecast, and gives me more or less confidence in what I'm going to do. You know, obviously for the last 10 years, we've had really big runs to the Nushagak district. I think 2017 is a prime example of when Port Moller was saying there's a whole lot of fish out there, and the fish start Nushagak bound fish, because now that we have the genetics, we can tell where the fish are going. It was really helpful. It allowed us to be a little more aggressive earlier than maybe we would have been had we not had that early warning.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Another question from Lindsay asks, just curious, what happens to the fish caught during the test fishery?
Yeah, hey, Lindsay. So before we went to a 2-vessel system and we were making regular trips to Port Moller, those fish were sold to Peter Pan and Port Moller, and the proceeds for that directly reduced the cost of the project. In recent years, we've been now that we're not going to port and the vessels are staying out at sea pretty much the duration of the project, we've been experimenting with trying to do processing on the vessels. So this year we will be running kind of a smaller test to try and process some of those fish, and then the cost from those would directly offset what we'd be asking for donations from RSDA and others to run the project. We're still trying to work out the kinks in that. Last year we weren't able to process any, and so what happens to them is those fish are discarded overboard after they've been processed and all the data collected. Last year we caught about 5,600 sockeye, and so all of those were discarded last year. Our hope is in the next year or two we can get all of those processed and be able to sell in order to offset cost of the project.
Thank you. Right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much to our presenters. The science that you all are doing is absolutely fundamental to the health and vitality of our fishery, and then that really affects our ability to participate as harvesters. So thank you so much. I see another question here, so I'll jump back to that. How do area biologists use in-season Port Moller information to manage districts Naknek-Kvichack, Egegik, Ugashik? I guess similar to before, but for the different districts.
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in here. This is Travis. Can really help with run timing, especially I look at, like, similar to what Tim said for Nushagak, I basically start with a 7-day travel time is kind of what I assume. And then I'm watching for like the genetics for Naknek, because that's the earliest run of the Naknek-Kvichack district. I'm watching for that genetics to come up first. You know, some years we've seen late run timing, and you'll see a few percent to basically zero for Naknek and Kvichack early on, and then somewhere around the 20th to 24th we start seeing a signal for Naknek. So I'm watching that. I'm also watching what those indices mean for the other districts. So in particular, usually Egegik and Nushagak are getting fish. So I'm looking at what are their percentages on those days with the bigger catch indices. That kind of helps me get an idea of what sort of volume we might be dealing with. And then I'll also watch it for Kvichack signals, which comes up later to see, well, is Kvichack really gonna be big this year? And that usually shows up really well in the genetics as that run builds. I've used it to close the fishery. I've used it to close the fishery to take breaks and get some nice clean escapement while there's just a lull in the run. And I've used it in the opposite direction. I've used it to pull the whole fishery in river so we could get another 300,000 fish up the Kvichack and meet the minimum of the escapement goal there. Some years it works better than others. Last year was really tough because we had those big easterly storms, and that basically threw them completely off track. So really, seeing what a peak was at Port Moller versus what a peak was inshore was really difficult because, well, when they get blown off for 4 or 5 days, well, that travel time gets thrown off. So that's how I'm usually looking at it. And then, yeah, those are the biggest ways I look at it.
Thank you. Oh, Hal Cook, I see ya. Go ahead, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, hi, thank you, guys and gals. What kind of escapement are you looking for in the Naknek before you initially open that up? I know in years past, previous biologists going back quite a ways, used to be along the lines of 10%, I think, of the estimated run. What are you looking for before we've talked about the other rivers?
Yeah. With Naknek, it can, well, I mean, it's true everywhere that you can get a big push really fast. You know, you can go from literally 1,500 fish and the next day 150,000 fish. The next day there can be over 1 million out there. So I watched for it to ramp up. When we start counting, we're seeing zeros, hundreds of fish a day. Then we'll see some days we might have like a few thousand. When I start seeing five figure daily escapements. So if it's 30,000, for example, I'm expecting the next day could be in the hundreds of thousands. So that's where I'm looking at. We're definitely gonna put nets in the water when we see it start ticking up. You know, I've been tricked before where, you know, we get a pulse of fish there June 24th or something like that. It's like, all right, here it is. And we might have a period and a half of decent fishing, and then all of a sudden, well, the run's not there yet. So I guess that's kind of how I'm playing it. I don't really have as much of a trigger point on numbers there. Another thing about the Naknek is being able to get escapement pretty much every tide, even when we're fishing. So that's how I try to play that one.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. We have another question. I think part of it might have been answered. He said he joined a little late, but he's asking about the difference between the ADF&G and UW forecasts. And then I think the second part we haven't addressed though yet, and that is there any data on the percentage of fish being caught in districts they aren't heading to? Basically, is there a portion of Naknek-Kvichack fish being caught by Egegik, Egegik caught by Ugashik? Does any of that go into the harvestable surplus?
Yeah, we do collect that data in season by way of catch sampling. So we have technicians at the processing plants that sample fish for the sockeye for genetics and age, and they collect all kinds of morphometric data and stuff. So that data is not ran in season. That is what we run post season to kind of tease out what fish actually ended up where and where they were caught. That goes into our run reconstruction. That then goes into our forecasting process. So that data is collected, but it is not available in season. As far as the differences between forecasts, I touched on it earlier, but I'm assuming you weren't here for that. The majority of the difference between those two is Ugashik 1.2s that FRI forecasted quite a bit higher than us for that specific age class. And that is the majority of the difference between our forecasts. That just has to do with model selection and which models each of us respectively chose to use for the forecast. All the data input is the same. So, you know, I leave it to you to take an average of the two or you know, see which one kind of ends up being closer to reality. But both are definite, you know, they're possibilities. They're on the spectrum of reality based on what the data tells us. But we just went a little more conservative and chose a lower number just for a number of reasons. A couple of different models were selected and averaged. So it's that's kind of the answer to what the differences are. You can kind of ask them specifically why they chose to go with that highest model number. So and then what the other question, yeah, the genetics, yeah, we do that postseason. It does not go into harvestable surplus necessarily at the time of or in season.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you. And this was recorded here, and we'll post that to the same page you probably registered through, but at bbrsda.com. So if anyone missed it or wanted to go back to look at some things more closely, that will be available. I just want to say thank you so much once again to our presenters. This science is what makes our fishery and our Bristol Bay sockeye salmon truly sustainable. And I know we're so proud of that as fishermen, and as the RSDA, so proud to promote Bristol Bay sockeye salmon brand out in the world as a really sustainable fish. And this is the team we have to thank for that. So thank you very much to our presenters. Next, I just to wrap us up, I want to introduce my colleague and our executive director, Lilani Dunn, who has just a couple of final remarks and some other upcoming events we have.
Thanks, Francis. I just wanted to thank everyone that presented today and everyone that called in. Just a few dates to keep in your calendars. On May 21st, we're going to have a U.S. seafood market update and key economic indicators presented to the fleet. It'll be at 11 a.m. Alaska, and running about 60 minutes long. And then the week of June 10th, the BBRSDA team is going to be up in both Dillingham and Naknek. On June 11th will be an in-person member meeting, and June 13th we will be in Naknek for an in-person member meeting. We'll post more details on our website as those dates approach, and whereabouts and exactly what time things will be.
Thank you, Lolani, and thank you everyone for tuning in today. Appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.